Well, the unemployment numbers came back way higher than the experts projected last week, and that sent the US stock market into turmoil, which in turn sent the global stock market into turmoil, which is causing the US stock market to go lower still. And I mean, it's crazy out there, right? Who saw this coming? Actually, the workforce. The US worker saw it coming. We've been talking about it for 18 months. Maybe we start listening to them, huh? Earlier this week, the July unemployment numbers were officially released, and the country recoiled in horror at the news that hiring has slowed and that the unemployment rates have jumped to 4.3%, the highest it's been in 3 years. Investors were shocked, and the Dow Jones dropped 600 points in a single day, and the Nasdaq was off by more than 10%. That's off of its highs for the year, making it officially a market correction. But you know who wasn't shocked? Anyone's been looking for a job over the past couple of years. I mean, seriously, that must have been a pretty big rock that economists and investors have been living under, because this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I mean, take a few minutes and scroll through TikTok or X or even look at random posts on LinkedIn, and you'll see there are some incredible tales of woe. Highly qualified candidates share stories about sending literally hundreds of resumes out without landing a single interview, and most don't even get a Dear John letter from the employers. Sometimes candidates will hear back from recruiters, they'll get an interview on the books, and then get ghosted by the recruiter, like a literal no-show for the call. And then there are some who are fortunate enough to land an interview, but they're often forced to run a gauntlet going through 4 or 5 or even 6 rounds of interviews, oftentimes including a detailed presentation that they then have to invest their own time into producing, presenting, tweaking, all that fun stuff. It's been hell out there. Now, it's clear that shenanigans are afoot out there in the workplace, but some of the stuff that's going on is just plain underhanded. Like the practice of posting ghost jobs. What's a ghost job, you ask? Well, that's when an employer will advertise for 10 different job openings when they really only have 2. Now, why the hell do they do this? It's so they can collect resumes like Pokemon cards, so they can form their own internal resume pools of candidates to go after should the need arise again later on down the road. Now, I understand the logic of doing something like this from an employer standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint, from a standpoint of the workers, it's an incredibly shady practice. Now, I think this is a sign of a bigger trend where employers just seem to have forgotten that there's a human being behind every resume they receive and every interview they book. For the job seeker, that resume or that interview or that call represents a glimmer of hope. You know, some candidates see these as opportunities to get out of a dead-end job, or an opportunity to advance, or an opportunity to take that next step up in their career. But for a lot of workers, the stakes are even higher than that. So that job seeker might be one of the hundreds of thousands of people who have been laid off recently and are running out of time, running out of money, and running out of options. Now you couple that with skyrocketing food and fuel and housing prices, and we're all wrestling with that, and you've got an absolute recipe for disaster for the workforce. So while the media seems obsessed with the coming financial perfect storm that this is creating, not enough attention is being paid to the storm that's already been here for American workers. Now, according to a recent Gallup workplace poll, only 21% of employees strongly agree that they trust the leadership of their organization. And let's look at another Gallup poll. Engagement, which is a measure of how much involvement and enthusiasm employees have in their workplace, is only at 23%. Only 23% of workers are actually engaged at work. Another 15% are actively disengaged, and then a whopping 62% are just not engaged at all. They're at the whatever stage of their career, and they're just showing up every day, and they're just taking up space. And that's not on them. It's not, frankly, on them. 41% of the workforce said they experienced stress a lot during the course of the day. And what's worse, only 24% of employees believe that their employer even cares about their mental well-being. And a big contributor to this, in my opinion, is that employers have stopped seeing workers as unique individuals. They've lost sight of the fact that behind each box on an org chart, is a living, breathing human being. And that's a very dangerous place to be. Now, when I was a kid, I remember my dad telling me stories about business leaders who would say things like, "It's been a tough year, but we tightened the belt and we were able to make it through without letting go of a single person." It used to be a badge of honor to be able to pull that off. And that's the way it should be. But you don't even have to go back too far to see this philosophy in action. So here's the story of Malden Mills. Now, Malden Mills was a thriving textile company in my hometown of Lawrence, Massachusetts. And they were probably best known for the brand Polar Tech, which is like kind of a fleece thing that like every piece of outdoor clothing seemed to be made of back in the day. So on December 11th in 1995, 3 of the company's buildings caught on fire and it devastated the entire company. I mean, it just ground it to a halt. But the owner, Aaron Feuerstein, stepped up. And not only did he rebuild the business, but he continued to pay the entire workforce throughout that shutdown. "I'm not throwing 3,000 people out of work 2 weeks before Christmas," he said. And he also said that his reaction, that instinct to keep taking care of people, was guided by his faith, his Jewish faith, stating that when all is moral chaos, this is the time for you to be a mensch. And that earned him the nickname, the Mensch of Malden Mills. Now, how engaged do you think Mr. Feuerstein's workforce was once they reopened those doors? Do you think he had problems getting employees to believe that he had their back? Do you think that there were engagement problems that were going on there? I don't think so. I mean, that's what real leadership looks like. That's how you walk the walk. Now, you contrast that with today, where just last month, a large and very profitable, I might add, software company and an HR technology company, no less, whacked 14% of its workforce on the eve of a major U.S. holiday, right before the 4th of July. Less than 48 hours later, one of the pundits in the space wrote a glowing article about what happened and called it a growth move, citing that how getting rid of all those pesky employees freed up resources so they could more aggressively invest in artificial intelligence. Now, this seemingly random cutting of the workforce is not a unique story either. It happens time and time and time again, and especially in the tech community where layoffs are often a monkey see, monkey do type of affair. Now, ironically, the team that's most involved with stuff like this is the human resources team. It's HR. I've said it time and again, HR's main responsibility and their core loyalty is to the business, not to you. So they're not your priests. When you're in HR, don't act like you're on a confession. They're not your bestie and they're not your bartender, so don't spill your guts. They're there to protect the company. But protecting the company and taking care of workers shouldn't be mutually exclusive, should it? The best leaders, people like Mr. Feuerstein, understand this. But sadly, there aren't too many Aaron Feuersteins left, and it's getting worse out there. Most leaders today view people not as individuals, but as assets. These inert objects that can be moved around and acquired and discarded as their business needs demand. And that view can even be seen in something as simple as how that employee-facing function within the business has been named throughout the years. So in the 40s through the 70s, they were called the personnel department. I mean, person was literally part of the title. And then sometime in the 70s, that department was more commonly called like employee relations. And then human resources or HR kind of gained traction in the late 80s. And many organizations, as you know, continue to call the department HR today. But corporate America, even in just that simple example, has literally removed the person from the equation. And look, maybe I'm being overly dramatic highlighting that shift, but I think the two concepts are related. I think removing those little reminders that workers are in fact unique individuals makes it easier to treat them as disposable as soon as it becomes profitable to do so. Cynical? Well, maybe a little. But this channel is called the rational workforce. I see no benefit in sugarcoating the way things are. If you're aware, if you're cognizant of what's going on, you can act or react accordingly. You can also recognize your own true worth and just how much power that you, as a worker and especially as a consumer, has in the way workplace cultures continue to evolve, or as we're seeing, in my opinion, pretty recently, we're seeing it devolve. So there's a big difference between being a boss and being a leader. And until CEOs and other members of the executive suite figure that out, they can expect to see worker trust and engagement levels continue to hit new lows. And for all of my fellow workers out there, you have a responsibility to safeguard yourself and your families from this environment. How can you do that? Pick up new skills. Start that side gig. Draw lines in the sand whenever your work life begins to intrude on your personal life. Do anything you can to create the opportunities that you need to bet on yourself. Because when you do, you'll become a bit more immune to the job market dynamics that we're all seeing shape up today. Well, that's it for another episode of The Rational Workforce, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you saw, click like, click subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things you can to keep the channel growing. That helps me to understand what content you like, and the more you subscribe, the more I'm able to continue making content like this and keep telling these stories out there. And also, please be sure to leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. I'd love to hear what other types of content you'd like for me to cover. And with that, this is Mark signing off. I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in. Bye, folks.